Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. And today we have Mr. Stefan Krawczyk. Hi, Stefan. How are you?
Hi, Andrew. How's it going?
Good to see you. Good to see you. And it looks like you've got a very sunny place where you are. So, put us all out of our misery and tell us what lovely place you're in today.
Yeah, I'm currently in Tahoe, which is in the Sierra Nevadas in California. So it's right by it's called Lake Tahoe. It's a giant lake kind of up here in California. So I'm kind of adjacent to it in another valley, but it's nice and sunny. Expected weather is probably mid to high 20 degrees Celsius, so pretty pleasant.
Nice. So you're out with nature. You're not in the big smoke today of San Francisco.
No. Yeah, I usually live in San Francisco, but out here for the week just because it's one nice thing about living in California. A lot of places are pretty accessible, and from San Francisco in like 4-hour drive.
Is it 4 hours now?
3 hours. I mean, so it depends where you're going, but 3 hours, 4. Depends where you're going, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember I've been up to Tahoe. I've been on a few sales kickoffs over the years when I was in San Francisco and San Ramon. But yeah, it's a very nice place up there. It's you just got to make sure you don't the bears don't get in the way. You got to make sure the bears don't eat you, I suppose. But apart from that, it's pretty.
Yeah, my family, I didn't see them, but apparently, wife saw a big bear and a little bear the other night when they were coming home. So, yeah, definitely.
Oh, really?
There are bears around here. Yep.
Did they have a chat with them?
No, I think they were just as astonished at wait, those bears just walked right by the house. Okay.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I know that we when I was over in San Francisco it's actually about a year just now until just in mid-September. We met downtown San Francisco for a coffee. So I know that originally Ebru, you could say partner in crime, so my co-organizer at Agile Data London had come across what you were working on with your team, and it sounded like really interesting to meet up. And I know we had a coffee very early in the morning, about 7:00 in the morning in San Francisco, and then I know we kept talking, and hence today coming on the show. So welcome to the G&T sessions. Obviously, what we do on the G&T sessions is talk to founders and co-founders, and share, I suppose, their journey, and also get to know what they've been doing so far, and what they see as the future. And so it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. So I suppose for people that don't know Stefan, what's getting you up in the morning at the moment, and how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'll start with the latter. I'm the CEO of a company called DAGWorks, DAGWorks. DAG stands for Directed Acyclic Graph, computer science term, but effectively, started a company actually. So I think a year ago, I was had just done the formation documents, probably, and something like that, and so actually hadn't quite kicked things off. So excited to kind of think about progress a year ago, but. We're trying to unify the way that people write data, machine learning, and LLM-based pipelines in Python. And so I'll leave that there, and we can expand on it more. But otherwise, what gets me up in the morning is I have 2 small kids, so I have to get up in the morning. But otherwise, I think it's there's having undertaken the CEO journey, it's all on me. It's not going to happen without me. Doing stuff, and so really, so getting up in the morning each day is there's work is always on the brain a bit, but it's I think coming from being a bit of a workaholic, I think it's I like accomplishing and doing stuff that are challenging and hard. In which case, this starting your own company is definitely one of the hardest things I've ever done. So really getting up in the morning and trying to get at the vision and try to make something of it is really kind of what.
Like trying to move things forward every day, kind of like it must seem. Well, I suppose it's that phrase relentless, but obviously there's also some highs and then some maybe not so high, so some peaks and valleys as you go through it. But remaining positive and stuff like that is important. Yeah.
Yep. No, I mean, thankfully there's always something good during the week. So in which case, some days, as you say, peaks and valleys.
Celebrate success. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So I mean, it sounds like you're not even a year old. Is that right? Is that in terms of trading or being like on the internet? Is that right? Or has it been going on for a few years before you came up over water?
So backing up, for the last decade, I've been thinking about starting my own company, right?
Wow.
And so,
Okay.
in which case, it was the trifecta of kind of confluence of things. I think enabled me to do it, right? I think so. Backing up, I went to kind of Stanford for my master's degree. A while ago, got the kind of entrepreneurship bug there. I mean, just the mindset of people was just that's really the conversation that you kind of had as you're studying, and so me being someone who likes to, I guess, like study a few options, so it took me a bit of a decade to kind of figure things out. But like I realized, I needed to know something that the market didn't, or at least some sort of advantage that I think is kind of competitive. To have the enthusiasm for the grind. So being passionate about kind of what we're building. And so I think what's nice for us is that we actually have an open source component, which is kind of helps drive some of that energy. So we can kind of see people using kind of what we're building and like it helping them. That's energizing. And so that's kind of part of the, what keeps you going. And then the third is actually, being able to execute. So I think, my co-founder and I think we have the skills and the ability to kind of put the team together to kind of execute on this idea better than other people.
And you said about, I suppose, the kind of, for people that don't know, I mean, open source is where you develop some kind of capability or some software, and then you effectively donate it to the world, don't you? You kind of basically, it's a gift. Is that the way you describe it?
I mean, like it's that's effectively, I think, the mechanics of it. You're giving away intellectual property that other people can kind of use. There are obviously various different licenses that you can kind of apply to it, but the one that we're using is like enables people to like pick it up and kind of use it easily. From the business perspective, you can kind of think of it as mainly rather than spending money on marketing and outreach, instead you've kind of put it into open source, and so you try to use that as the kind of for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, it's quite a while ago, but obviously I got involved in the would it be late 90s? No, not late 90s. Probably, yeah. No, 2000 mid 2000s. I suppose with open source, with like the predecessor to GitHub or Git. Is like Subversion for version control. And obviously it's been around for a while, but it's I suppose it's more of a community, and then kind of you have people who commit code to that particular project, and then you kind of, I suppose, I've never actually had it described like that before, like where you describe it as kind of free marketing, but I suppose it is because you get awareness out there, don't you? And isn't the thing about on GitHub where you get stars? Is that right? Is it something like you get stars where people get, is that like a like, I suppose, on GitHub? Is that how you describe it?
It's a bit of a like, a bit of a proxy for like interest. Most people, when they're looking, and they hear something like how many stars it have might, make them take a second look at it. Oh, it has a lot of stars. Maybe it's something serious, or just take a look at it. Why does it have so many stars?
Right.
And so there's definitely that's a useful proxy, awareness or engagement.
So you said that. I mean, you said that you went to Stanford, obviously, which is a prestigious, academic institution in the Valley, and then did you go into kind of like a corporate, or did you kind of start entrepreneurial, or start with a small startup, or what was been your journey so far? Did you, or have you done both since you formed your own company?
Yeah, a bit of. I wanted to say like so. One, I grew up in New Zealand, so I didn't have. I had to have work visa kind of stuff sorted, and so in which case doing a startup straight out of Stanford was not really possible, or at least I didn't have the conviction to want to go through that kind of progression hurdle. But my philosophy was a little bit of like go work at a few places to kind of see how things are done, and slowly moved to smaller places.
Right.
So my first job out of Stanford was at LinkedIn, where it was kind of in hyper-growth mode just before it went public. And so part of it was just seeing what's a mature engineering organization and their processes? How do they hire? What do they scale? What are the challenges? How how do you build products? Kind of things like that. So I was there 2.5 years on 2 teams. So definitely that was large. Then I went to engineer number 13 at a company called Nextdoor. So your neighborhood social network. So I went from one social network to another, and I got to build out the first part of the thing. I've seen how social networks or like things they need, so I'll know what to build. And so at Nextdoor, they didn't really have much, so I got to build out a lot of first versions of things. So first data warehouse, analytics, kind of tracking pipelines, kind of a lot of end-to-end kind of product development. And then I went to after 2.5 years there as well, I think, went to a startup that kind of was where I went purely to gain technical kind of get deep on some sort of tech. So basically I was like, machine learning is going to be big, so why not go work for a company that's doing natural language processing, and focusing on that. And so that was my first B2B type company. That lasted only less than a year. They ran out of money, but it was a good experience in terms of just getting deep into tech. And then I was then at Stitch Fix for the longest time, for 6 years, for my longest part of my career, where I went from pre-public to being post-public for a bit, and building out 3 different teams, really trying to help scale and build out the kind of self-service machine learning platform targeting data scientists. And so that's where some of the tech and what we open sourced came from Stitch Fix. And so part of the idea being we want to bring the internal kind of product experience in terms of building machine learning pipelines, pipelines in general, like we had at Stitch Fix, but more broadly make it accessible and applicable to everyone else who wants a world-class kind of experience of being able to enable data scientists to build, own, manage, and productionize and be on call.
So it's a bit like, thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's an interesting background, because you kind of like, so you kind of could say you've done your time before you became the founder or co-founder of your own business. So I suppose that's been helpful
part
to
of
kind
that was, I mean, like, the chip on my shoulder would be I complained, or at least I thought having worked at those other companies, had better ideas of how they should have been managed or run. So now it's kind of like, I should really put my money, or where my mouth is, in terms of if I think I can do things better, I should try.
I mean, just a quick question: when you were at LinkedIn, was Reid Hoffman very visible, or was it kind of like too big by that time anyway? Or
so Jeff Weiner had just come in as CEO, but Reid Hoffman was there.
Jeff,
He'd come and do talks and stuff, and like very. I love, one of the things I loved about LinkedIn is they did this kind of great job with like speaker circuits, book circuits. Like I have a bunch of, they brought in, like I have a bunch of signed books from various authors, like Tony Hsieh, for example, who not alive anymore, but like his book, Delivering Happiness, was kind of pretty good book on like corporate culture and what's one extreme way to build it.
The Zappos guy, is that?
Zappos guy, yeah.
Zappos guy, yeah.
And they brought in various different kind of management-ish books, or people who. And so, which case, I really enjoyed LinkedIn's kind of culture from that perspective. Like, once a month or every quarter, it was like trying to bring in some sort of employee enrichment, make them think bigger, or that stuff. So that was one of the things that I think I quite enjoyed about LinkedIn.
Yeah, because I mean, I suppose that was pre-Microsoft taking over then, or acquiring LinkedIn. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's, I think it's something like, is it like, I don't know, there's 1 billion users on LinkedIn every day, or something ridiculous like that. Is it right? I don't know, I mean, more or less. There's a large number of. I think the stat I heard was something like 750 million people have got an account, but then less than 5% post anything. Yep. It's some kind of like ridiculous number like that or something.
Yeah, I mean, right. LinkedIn makes a lot of money on just like, people just filling out their profiles, right? Because that's really some of the monetization strategies, like all the ads and all that kind of outreach you can do on top of LinkedIn, given all the information you have about people and what they connect to. And it's like, yeah, like out of the social networks that I have, it's like definitely the most stable one that I'm turning back to time and again. But now obviously my role's changed, and that is a great way for me to spread my message. That's What one of the you could say one reason why it's hard to displace LinkedIn, just because of the amount of data and stuff there.
Yeah, it's like a competitive advantage. Yeah, I mean, so it's also interesting because I suppose it's not as though you've been in one company; you've been in multiple companies. So also, have you thought about how you curate? Ideally curate the best of the bits the companies you've been in, to insert into DAGWorks. Because I suppose you're the master architect of what DAGWorks could be. Is that something that's crossed your mind as well, or?
Yep. Yeah, no, totally. I mean, like one of my realizations at LinkedIn was that I was like, as an engineer, but to get something out, you have to like align with product management. And I found that really annoying, or at least, and so at LinkedIn, I guess I helped kind of pioneer a little program called Inday, Incubator, which was, you could think of it as, so LinkedIn had all these hack days, and all these people, like part of the hack days was just to like get people to build things, but they didn't really go anywhere, because to get anywhere onto the website, you needed kind of product management sponsorship. So part of the idea
it was like a gating process.
Well, I mean, like if you weren't aligned with the product manager, they wouldn't care. Like basically, this is where part of the learning was like, if you're doing product management, you got to make sure that you have the right incentives or metrics aligned, since engagement on a website should not mean clicks, because that means it lead you to build products that make you to click a lot, but the experience is terrible, right? So like, so that's where part of I came up with this kind of grassroots way of like, you can think of, they had a hack day each month, sorry. So you can think of it, that's your seed round. Build a little prototype, and then you can pitch for more time to go and complete it and finish it, and then as a means to kind of get around some of the product management layer stuff. And so, and then next door, I kind of iterated on that a little bit more, in that rather than making it just technical, like just broadly thinking of like, how can everyone has great ideas. There's a lot of people who are very close to where the rubber meets the road, but then there's this kind of, it's hard for companies to, like things to get up to the top level just because of these layers of management things. And so, start a little program called R3, so reflect, reinvent, refine. So what was the idea that people have great ideas, but if you just, execs are terrified of like, give anyone time to do anything. They're like, they're going to waste their time. But with this idea, it was
that's a positive mental attitude, isn't it?
I mean, because technically that's one reason why some management are cynical about hack days, right? But so part of the idea was, well, no, I think everyone has ideas, technical or non-technical, but you just need to give them, some parallel framing, or like guiding lanes. And so, which case, reflect, reinvent, refine was meant to be this. You can use those three words pretty interestingly. So you can like, hey, reflect on your current processes. What do you want to refine, or what do we need to reinvent? And so and then you can then theme it as a way to like, we need efficiency or something, right? So let's try to make things like move better and faster. So that that, as far as I know, is still running to this day, or at least cool. Even though I left many years ago. But in terms of to earlier point on like taking the best of things, right? I think that's definitely something that I definitely thought about, because I think how companies develop product, how you get ideas, how you process is all kind of intertwined with the culture of the company. And so in which case, like at Stitch Fix, it was a little bit of an extreme where there's no product managers, right? And so part of it was...
It was not, really?
At least in the algorithms organization that we were in, like...
Wow.
Yeah, basically, I mean, part of it was, if you're building human-in-the-loop things for machine learning. So Stitch Fix, for those who don't know, was a personal styling service, so you could order clothes, fill out a profile, order clothes, and an algorithm and a stylist would kind of in tandem pick out stuff. But there are different other parts of the business of like, well, how many clothes should we have? What sizes? How should you order them? Where should they be distributed? Like those are all decisions humans have to make. And so data scientists were building kind of product for them. And so, there was no product managers because they're mainly building for the end user.
The selection was the product, I suppose, wasn't it?
Yeah. Part of it, I mean, or at least, how do you make a company that sells clothes? If you think of all the human decisions and optimizations you can make, how can you make them make better decisions? And so that's where they,
was Stitch Fix like? Is it like Farfetch and like the big, the big? Is it an online store as well as a selection, like a kind of a curator as well?
It was more. I mean, you could think of it as like you basically maybe had some preferences. Maybe said, hey, I want more pants, or I'm looking for shirts or something. Right, and the stylist would just interpret that with the algorithm to kind of what to send 5 things in a box. You'd only pay for what you keep. You'd send everything else back. It expanded to being to be more like a direct, like you could reorder things. Like, oh, I like those. I bought these jeans. I want to get all the different colors or something. Right, you can do that yourself. And so they.
So it was like mass kind of like styling customization at scale.
Yep. And part of it was the entire business was try to optimize with some sort of data scientist team behind it. So because like how can you sell clothing's a margins game, so how can you optimize the number of warehouse workers you have given the demand? You don't want to overbuy inventory because then that's sits in your warehouse unused.
Left with a headache. Yeah.
Right. So how can you optimize what inventory you buy? How do you discover things? Make sure that you're reacting and trending appropriately. So there's like a lot of interesting kind of data science problems there.
That's fascinating. So really, at that point, then data and technology is pretty central to the operating model, isn't it? You kind of got it's like you're reliant and dependent on it, aren't you?
Yep. Yeah. And then so I guess bring it back to like the best of all the companies. So which case, I definitely think from a process perspective, you can get a lot done without product managers, assuming you have someone can be pretty close with the end user. If not, then you need someone being a little product manager. So if you're building something that you can't be the end user of, or you don't have empathy for, that's where I see actually the value of product managers. They're coming in, but otherwise, I think hopefully with building with DAGWorks, we can avoid some of the worst parts of some of the cultures that we've experienced working in, and instead just have all the good stuff. But we're still small, so part of the challenge is actually scaling culture. So we'll see as we grow. But yes. Otherwise, the thought is there to ensure that we build great culture.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I suppose one of the things I was just triggered in my head when you were talking was about, was there a particular thing that happened that said, right, now's the time to actually go and build a business? Was there something that happened when you were at Stitch Fix?
I mean, so we did a lot of build versus buy in terms of building kind of the machine learning self-service kind of platform. We built most things, but we did bring vendors in, and we were, I guess, my team was cynical. We're like, no, we can build something better. I think.
You mean like any big tech shop where they go, no, we can build that in 5 minutes, kind of thing. We don't need to buy anything. Is that what you got in Stitch Fix?
I mean, part of it. I mean, we did a lot of stuff. I mean, part of it was we just started. There wasn't anything available off the shelf, or open source wasn't mature enough. So part of it was just a factor of the times. The other was So other people getting funding, or like, hey, these ideas. I mean, we'll always had the ambition. So then we're thinking about how can we test the waters a little bit. And so, in which case, part of the idea was, let's open source Hamilton, since I think that's pretty. Which is the name of the project we kind of came up with at Stitch Fix. Let's open source that and see what kind of reception it gets. And so that's really it got some good reception.
So you kind of incubated Hamilton within Stitch Fix, and then brought it outside.
Yeah, right. a lot of the companies that were getting funding were tech teams that were coming out of other tech companies, taking taking some technology they had internally, open sourcing it, and then coming around. So I was like, oh yeah, that seems like a reasonable process for starting something. So in which case, of the things that we built, I mean, we could have open sourced a few other things, but like I think Hamilton was partly also the easiest thing, and then also like I think you got to be skating to a little bit towards where the future is, versus competing, because there's a lot of different tools we build at Stitch Fix now have a lot of competition for, and I don't know whether if I was to go back in time, and had the current options today, would have like built as much versus taking stuff off the shelf. But so that's kind of.
But you make. I suppose you make a decision at a point in time, don't you? So you make an informed decision at that point, don't you?
Yeah. And so the idea.
It's right.
Yeah. So the idea to start something was roughly like, well, we're seeing other places. Well, why don't we see how open sourcing something goes to see what people think, and then one thing led to another, and then like.
So what you're saying is adoption and those stars on GitHub or whatever they are, then they're a leading indicator of the kind of traction you're getting with the concepts you brought out in.
I mean, it's you want to know. I think part of the grind is like, well, what do people think? And so that's kind of energizing or invigorating. Like, oh yeah, like hey, these ideas someone else likes, so that gives me confidence that I think I have more. I can continue on that path.
It must be pleasing, something that you built and then you put out there, and then you get reactions and you get people adopting it. I mean, it must be really satisfying, that fulfilling.
Yeah, so part of it was like, so we had at Stitch Fix, there was over 100 data scientists, and so we were kind of servicing them. But like with open source, it's like, well, we have thousands to help, right? Right. So so that's also the other kind of invigorating factors. Like we open source something, and like we had, now we have much broader reach. Right?
And I suppose you probably, I don't know if you've been asked this question before, but you called it Hamilton. Is there what's the background to calling it Hamilton? Did you have like a naming competition to decide what to call it, or was Hamilton the first one and the one you just decided on?
So I guess so in computer science, there's like you could say two problems that people the two hardest problems about computer science are, one, how do you name things, and two, cache and validation. But like so naming things is always a bit of an art with projects and kind of computer science engineering, because you're always starting something new. Like, what do you call it? And so so the etymology of, or at least the reason why we picked Hamilton was the team that we were building this for was called the Forecasting, Estimation, and Demand Team, or the FED team for short. This was going to be pretty foundational, because like this we're going to be like rewriting most of their code into it. And so I had also at that time learned a bit more about American history. And so Hamilton the musical being a key player in that, and like Alexander Hamilton was a founding father, but he also founded the Federal Reserve. And so the Fed, and then what the team was doing was also trying to model the business, and then physics. There are Hamiltonian concepts about modeling the world, and then the approach of kind of how we were implementing it was kind of graph theory based. But in graph theory, there's also Hamiltonian type concepts, and so the confluence of that, I was like,
it's like a recurring theme coming through, isn't it?
Yeah, and then I mean, those three things were the confluence. So there was I don't recall too many other names, but I was like, this feels pretty good. Now, since then, I've also found out that there was so one of the things that Hamilton enables teams is like to have better testing and code quality. There's also a Hamilton in NASA, and she was also focused on code quality stuff. So I was like, oh great. I mean, if I knew that, I could have added it to the story. And then most recently with Formula One, people like Lewis Hamilton. I'm like, yeah, no, does it make it go fast? And I'm like, yeah, no, that does too. So like, I think there's a lot of useful surnames or people with Hamilton that I think we can add to the origin story. But,
that's a good one with the Lewis Hamilton one.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, so my co-founder, so we actually came up with two implementations, and so he was like, since you're calling it Hamilton, I'm going to call this one Burr. And so for those who don't know American history, there was Hamilton and Burr were kind of two contemporaries, and they didn't really like each other. Burr ended up, I guess, killing Hamilton in a duel. And so that was part of his tongue-in-cheek was like, I think my implementation is better. But the data science team chose Hamilton over Burr, and so
all right, okay,
where it is today.
Wow. No, it's great. It's great to have a story. I mean, it's a good origin story as well, isn't it? About makes it kind of real and can bring to life. Fantastic.
Yep. Yeah, that's one thing. I enjoy naming things. I guess it's the one skill that I think I do pretty reasonably well. But
so did you actually do like a voting? Did you vote for it, or did you just come up with that?
No, yeah, just came up with it, and then part of the team, the data science team will choosing was basically, sounds good, like, so kind of went with it.
And how many people are in the world of now engaged with Hamilton? Then I presume it's more than one and less than a million.
I mean, like it's hard so with open source, it's hard to get any telemetry, especially Hamilton is a library, so it means it's very easy to kind of install and run anywhere. So there's no server that's running. So in terms of having something that sends telemetry or metrics, it's a little harder. And then with privacy and other things these days, we don't of the telemetry we capture, we can't actually identify too much, other than like say someone ran something or someone used the library, which you can kind of turn off. But like I guess we're close to 100,000 downloads. There's from the main Python registry where the library kind of lives, where people can kind of pull from it. Otherwise, in Slack, we have a community of over 200 people now from various different companies, and then it's hard to know who's using it in the wild. But like I think from a star perspective, is it increasing though? Is it increasing over time? Yeah. So we have from a GitHub stars perspective, we have I think over 1,500 people have started the project. There's a little we actually had to fork the repository. So for those who don't know, that means the code was under Stitch Fix's kind of name, but then because my co-founder and I were two maintainers, we had to kind of fork the repository, and so we kind of have a star count split in two. But like we did the union to make sure we identified uniques, and so that's over 1,500, and it's growing. And so I think there's a little bit of network effects. So the more stars you get, the faster they come, I think.
Right. It's like a snowball effect. Yeah.
So I mean, seeing that grow now, I mean, that's exciting. We're almost I think we split from the old repository at around 900 stars. I think we're mid 800s now with the new one. So like there's obviously some people who starred both, which is nice. But otherwise, things are growing and moving up to the right. And then it's always interesting to hear what people are using it for when they come in to ask for help. So there are a few people who are coming in who are doing back office reconciliation for mutual funds, which is kind of interesting. Then people using it for large language model workflows. It's really this is where I get excited and energized by just the breadth of what people are using it for and the companies that are picking it up.
So large language models is a bit LLMs is all this stuff that's kind of surrounding this open AI and all this latest kind of tsunami that's hit the world. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so large language models. If you've heard of ChatGPT, there's a large language model behind that, and so a lot of people are trying to build workflows or pipelines. Another way to think about it in terms of like how do you integrate those with your systems and resources. So that could be on the backend side, or that could be on a front end web service side. And Hamilton you can use to kind of write the code that explains both and gives you a nice process.
And one of the things, thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's a very hot topic, obviously, as it evolves. Like a week by week basis, something else has happened, and something else has been announced.
Totally. I mean, it's hard to keep up. This is where I think part of the challenge is like it's hard to know what to adopt as well, since like things change. From a software engineering process, how do you make sure that things are updated and other stuff? And so I think we have a pretty good story there, but like I feel like sometimes we're moving too slowly just because everyone else is moving so quickly and pushed out.
It's all relative. I mean, one of the things, for the people that are in the audience, they probably heard this phrase, but they probably don't always know what actually it is. So if people said, people talk about Python, then what would you, my understanding, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the, Monty Python was involved in selecting, and it's derived from Monty Python, the famous UK comedy act. Is that true? Is that correct?
I think Guido van Rossum, the creator of Python, I think that's what he attributes. What do you name Python after? But otherwise, it has a snake logo, and most people would just assume it was named after the snake, which I did for the longest time. But otherwise, so Python, I think, is a pretty ubiquitous, one of the most common languages, and part of the reasons why is it kind of reads the most, I think, a little bit like just normal English or something. Like if you were to write out commands, it looks the most natural to an English text. You can also write a lot of things in a short amount of kind of lines of code versus other programming languages. And so, and then it has like it's a network effect where a larger ecosystem. So with software and Python, there's a lot of free stuff you can kind of get out, and so that just kind of compounds. In which case, Python covers the data machine learning side of things, but also covers building web services and applications and frameworks. And so it's so therefore from a organizational company process, you don't want to have too many languages. If you can just have one, that simplifies a lot of things, right? And so Python is a pretty good one to choose.
And so is Python, in your view, one of the fastest growing adoption of languages these days in a developer sense? Is that fair, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, like I haven't, I don't recall the latest stats, but like, yeah, it's definitely trending up there. I think the only other current one is like JavaScript or TypeScript or something. There's definitely you're doing very front endy stuff, in which case, Python. There are some forays to put Python in there now, but otherwise, yeah, like I think Python is definitely one of the most popular, and therefore network effect fastest growing, therefore as well, right? Versus other language. But yeah, if you're trying to do any data machine learning, LLM backend and stuff, like it is pretty much, I think, the de facto.
It's like they usually select Python. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. It's like start with Python. It's only when you really need like performance that you might switch away from Python. But now Python can connect with things like that can perform pretty fast, so you can maintain. You write in Python, but underneath it translates or like hooks into things that run faster. So that's generally been the approach of, and also one of the reasons why Python is so sticky is just that. If you really need to get performance, people can engineer that, but you don't have to move away from actually using it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, as I mentioned to you before we joined this episode, my son, who's now 18, James, my youngest son, he said he basically started Python programming when he was 16. I was doing it when he was at secondary school, so it's infiltrating even education now as kind of like, I suppose, part of the computer science curriculum.
Yeah, I think it's also a pretty common first language for computer science curriculums. I remember back in my day it was Java, and I was like, Python I think is definitely a little simpler, especially if you're expecting more people to have to know how to program something. I think Python's pretty good. And like just recently, I think this past week, Microsoft announced you can do Python in Excel, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that's kind of big. So having Python accessible from Excel, because I do think it's like if you're doing spreadsheet programming, you effectively can write Python.
Okay, like the formulas kind of thing.
If you write formulas. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, mine was I think it was BASIC and COBOL when I was starting to develop, and Fortran, and can't remember what else was there. Yeah, probably pretty much those. So it was slightly different time of the year, you could say. Slightly different starting point.
Yeah. I mean, I had a Commodore 64 growing up, and was like, asked my dad how to program something, and he was like, this is poke and peek stuff, and I'm like, no, it's too low level language for me. But HTML was kind of where you say probably the first language I got. Was doing a few things.
Right. So it's interesting. Yes, I mean, so I suppose you could say with your background, you kind of like got a technical background. How are you finding the kind of the other side of it, the business side of being a kind of a because as a CEO, I suppose that as you said a bit earlier, the kind of the buck stops with you. Obviously you've got you can look at it through a technical lens, but how are you getting on with the business side of it? How are you finding that?
Yeah, totally. Definitely. As part of the challenge of learning how to be a technical CEO, because you definitely have my biases of talking to someone like what we can build can works for everyone, but really, I mean, when you're starting a business, you really need to prioritize and understand. You want to learn who's going to be the best customer, not trying to build the best product for everyone, because you can't do kind of both at the same time. And so really it's like learning how to do outreach and ask the right questions on calls. Since someone gives you 20 minutes, how what is you can definitely show them the product, and I can definitely talk in like technical details, but like that's really not I've had to unlearn wanting to do that, and really how do you ensure that the 20-minute conversation you have with someone, you can kind of one learn about some of their needs and pains, and then also understand whether this type of personal business is a fit for what we're building immediately, or at least would be a good target, because since you need to have repeatability. But that's really kind of the things that have been new to me is like outreach, trying to learn, trying to demonstrate, understand, listen effectively, and ask the right questions to make sure that you don't have infinite time to build things. So how can you find the right paths to get into the right places the most quickly to prove and validate what you're building is valuable? Then you can kind of continue to build the business. So
it's been an interesting journey already. Sounds like.
Yeah, totally. I think finding product market fit. I mean, that's effectively another way to kind of frame it, right? And so there's the mechanics of the business and other things to kind of think about, which is actually I think isn't too difficult from an engineering perspective. It's just understand the moving parts, how much they cost, and what it takes, right? I mean, that's all relatively straightforward. It's more I think also learning customer engagements and legalese and contracts, and thinking about what are the human process side of you might have a fit. How do you get a champion, and then how do you ensure that they can be successful to promote you? As opposed to I've been on engineering teams and internal teams. It's easy for me. I would have been in those conversations, right? And so trying to ensure.
Well, I suppose are you? I suppose it's also the thing. Is it you're on the other side of the table now? Before you were the buyer, potentially, but now you're the seller. So it's you see it from through the other lens, I suppose, don't you?
Yeah, and that's learning experience, and then also partly also learning that some Silicon Valley companies are pretty technical, and operate pretty differently than other companies, right? And so that's also learning some of those structures. Because if I was to say I have been in a bubble in Silicon Valley, it does operate slightly differently. Maybe with a little less process, maybe with a little looser. Like we can do more budget, but other places a little more constrained, a little more formal processes, check offs. Learning that kind of side of things. It has been interesting, and part of the course, something we need to do.
So your view is that, like in Silicon Valley, that the actual environment that you're selling into is different. Is that what you're
or at least like I mean, there's definitely signaling like if you can get a Silicon Valley company or tech company to use you, but they're in terms of they're not representative of like where most companies who are doing say B2B make their money from, right? And so you definitely I think have been slightly insulated. There's always meetups. It's easy to meet people. It's always versus most companies I think would make their money outside of Silicon Valley. And so, which case, how do you engage with that? I think one nice thing with COVID is it meant that a lot of people are more comfortable doing things remotely. So that means there is less travel, but then there's also meetings in person versus virtual is something to I can obviously you have to learn how to read Zoom or read the call versus which maybe would have been a little easier to read in the room, since you can kind of see everyone, versus if you're presenting something on one side, looking at what you're presenting, and you can't really focus on some of the other how to run a meeting and how to virtually and leading to a place where you're not wasting anyone's time from both sides, right? And so a lot of you could say how do you sell something process and get in? It's kind of has been the difference from building things, because I still want to give myself a task where I'm actually building something, just to make sure that I feel like I accomplished something.
But you still want to keep your hand in.
Yeah. I mean, part of it I think is at this stage we kind of need to, because we're small, but I think it's also partly a release for me to be able to I can check off something technical, because I know
Yeah, because I suppose with the things you do on the business side, you're not going to get instantaneous feedback. It does take it takes certain steps, doesn't it? So it makes it more interesting, and also about, I suppose, also interpreting what's the best way to try and progress things. When if you're the master of your own code base, it's you can just action it straight away, and you've got an immediate impact. Whereas it's that human side of working with people and working out how you support them. Yep. So it's a bit more. You could say, is it more complex or less complex, I suppose, but I think both of them are pretty complex in different ways.
Yeah, totally. I think the nice thing, the feedback loop is just, it takes time, right? When you're talking to people, whereas like, I think the instant gratification of me building something and shipping it, like from the open source side, I think, definitely get feedback much faster, right? And so that's, something to, learning to try to figure out. This is what I was saying on the conversations, like how can you do things in a way to, like, I don't know, to speed up that feedback loop? Because I do think actually, the questions you do ask can help speed that up. And part of it's getting the rapport, part of it's maybe asking a slightly harder question, which is for me maybe being an engineer, maybe feels slightly unnatural. Like, can we book the next meeting today? Like which is partly also coming from New Zealand where things are a little more laid back and stuff.
Right.
Is also maybe me being a slightly learning to be a little bit more things that wouldn't come as naturally to me, but in a business context, makes sense to do to ensure that things are moving forward. But that's kind of some of the things already on self-reflection.
The nuances.
I've observed myself like, why didn't I ask that? Well, because I don't want to be too pushy, but no, I need to ask that question, right? So,
well, I suppose it's the way you land it as well, isn't it? If you land it with a smile, then they're bound to react in a positive way. You would thought, or you would hope.
Yeah.
So one of the things we talk about on the G&T sessions as well is obviously, when people come on, they want to talk about a lot of their what we call peaks. They've gone from this to this to this to this, and obviously what we also want to do is talk about valleys. Or that kind of thing, that they plan to do X and then Y happened and then they learnt Z. So, I mean, in terms of that, is there any particular stories or examples that you'd like to share with the audience that would be valuable? And, not only for you explaining it, but also for them to listen to as well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe more so for the more technical people. I guess I was trying to think of like the analogy. I suppose there might be one somewhere, but like I optimize a lot for learning, I guess, in my career. So really trying to chase interesting projects and kind of things like that. But that can backfire on you if you're in the corporate world, or at least in a company.
What, you mean like shiny toy syndrome, you mean?
No. I mean, like, well, it's you might spend a lot of effort on something but not get rewarded for it. And the reason, so if you think of like companies have core projects, core products, and then there's things they're doing on the sides that are like peripheral, speculative stuff. That's usually the stuff that's sometimes more interesting because 0 to 1. There's a lot of greenfield kind of other stuff. But the engineer in me, I guess that's what I was chasing. But then if it wasn't core to the product, like for most companies, the best place if you want career advancement and growth as an engineer, you should be working on their core product and making that core product better, because that core product generally gets more investment. And so therefore there's more opportunities to get, raises or promotions and stuff. The stuff on the periphery, like it's kind of like hit or miss. And maybe it's up to the whim of the product manager. And like, they didn't really, couldn't pitch it or whatever. And so like, I had spent time on projects that didn't get shipped to production. And, I remember having a conversation with my manager, was like, I can't give you a promotion because none of your stuff shipped, right? And so like I was like, well, it wasn't. Right. I got it to production, I just wasn't allowed to turn it on. So it's not that wasn't my problem. It was a problem of product management and management of like squabbling as to like whether this was something that we wanted to release or not, right? And so and you, my manager, you told me that I could go into this project and it was a good idea, right? So so that's like I think from a career perspective, if you're looking at definitely know what you're optimizing for. And so just be aware of like, if you're doing things that are speculative on the side, like if it does win out, sure, the rewards are big, but then also, you have to, I think, understand a bit more of how management thinks before you make that assessment. So that was kind of, that was also one of the reasons. I mean, candidly, that was the reason why I left LinkedIn, because I was like annoyed at that kind of response. Like, screw it, I'm going to go somewhere else. And so.
What you're annoyed at? What? Sorry, you're annoyed at what response?
I mean, no, yeah. I built things that I couldn't ship, and it wasn't from.
I see.
So I spent time, on things that weren't my own, and so that's really was, maybe in hindsight a little hasty. Maybe I should have, switched teams rather than leaving LinkedIn. But otherwise, I mean, that's kind of, one
that was
thing.
An epiphany moment for you.
Yeah. One thing comes to mind there. It's like, just you got to be aware of like what you're optimizing. So in which case, when I went to the startup, I knew that like, hey, an outcome wasn't necessarily going to be a big thing, but I was going to be there just to like get deep in the technology and be okay with it failing, right? And so that's kind of mindset there. Let's see. Yeah, the other epiphany is like, it's much easier to start a company without 2 young children. So but definitely doable though. So not to say you can't do it, but like I was like, no, I only had a few more hours, I could get a few more things done. But so if I was to say something to my younger self, so they're they're going to be 2 and 4 at the end of the year. So
wow.
Still a little bit of a handful, but not.
So
not
you can't hire them yet. Then you can't hire them yet.
No, they can come in and like type some things on the key on the keyboard, but currently it doesn't lead to much.
Well, you got future star employees. Get them young. Yeah, they'll be doing GitHub commits in a few years. Give it time.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, I want to say I feel like I've had some luck in terms of thinking of next things or like introductions or getting other things, and so I want to say I want to say I've had too many career valleys. I mean, this is where I might in a year I might have some more stories because I do think because otherwise in Silicon Valley, being in that company, it was like pretty cushy. Wouldn't say too many of those other than career advancement being the thing, being the main point. But otherwise, that's kind of we can dig more there. But otherwise,
No, I understand. So I suppose switching it a little bit then is it what are you most grateful for?
Yeah, I mean, just being. I mean, like if you ask for help for people, people generally, like, or at least I don't know whether it's my demeanor or the way that I reach out or the way that I ask for help. But like, I think, this is where it's, applications to, job interview kind of advice that I had from people to, applying to Y Combinator, for example. What's like, I mean, if I think back to like, applying to Stanford as well, like advice on like, what should be in your write-up, your application, what do they want to hear? Stuff like that. And so really, I think, when I thought of something like, hey, I want to do something, and then like, how do I do it? Like, I've been pretty grateful and finding the right person, give me the advice that I thought, that has enlightened me in terms of, structure and process, like things to think about. Right?
Reinforce your faith in humankind.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's definitely, like, if it wasn't for the people I knew and the help that I got, I definitely wouldn't be here.
And you mentioned, that's a great one. I mean, if you mentioned Y Combinator, what's the story behind Y Combinator? Because obviously Y Combinator is probably, I don't know, is it the most prestigious tech accelerator in the world? Is that?
Yeah, I mean,
in San Francisco.
I think it's a pretty well-known accelerator. I think it's pretty known, or at least from a statistics perspective. I think in terms of percentage of billion-dollar companies minted, they have pretty high up there.
It's got the unicorn record, is it?
Yep. And so like they I think it's like for my batch it was like a 2% acceptance rate. So they're pretty selective. I guess the story behind it was.
So you say like in 100 applications, only 2 get through.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so thankfully, I had known some people who'd gone through Y Combinator. I mean, part of it's like, understanding, every organization has things that they focus on, right? And so ultimately it's people making decisions. And so just if you have a few insiders or people who help, help you understand how people think, right? That's kind of, I think goes a lot to like, if you're doing any Reddit application or how you're communicating, right? Understanding the other side, right? Is pretty useful. So in which case, I got some advice on like, you need to be able to be pretty succinct, right? You need to be able to, clearly explain what you're doing and do that with a way that's confidence, right? Have faith in yourself, have the vision, right? Because they do a written one, then they have like a 10-minute interview, right, where they ask you questions and stuff. And so this is where nerve-wracking times and things. And so in which case, was grateful for the network and company that I had that like could ask them like, what should you expect, or like what are the things? I think it's the reason why if you can practice or drill stuff beforehand, it makes you better. So like in sport, you do, in swimming, you practice, drills for technique, right? I guess in the army, you practice, mock stuff. So when you're ready, it just comes to you naturally, right? I mean, so I think this isn't any different. So if you can ask for
practice
help,
makes perfect. Yeah.
But yeah, that's just right. Otherwise, YC is great, especially if you haven't built something yet, right? And so for us, we only had the open source project, we had the idea, and so it was I think right place, right time.
Right.
So super grateful. Great. Can't recommend it enough for like first time founders. So yeah, definitely if you have ambition, no matter how young or old you are, like main things YC wants to see is like people who have grit, can make small things into big things, and a lot of people have to apply multiple times, and in that case they just want to see progress, right? And so I was lucky enough to get in first time. This is where I attribute some of that to like the coaching of just I mean, part of it,
people in your network.
I mean, I do have a resume. I don't know, this is where people think it's good, but I think less of it. But otherwise, it's definitely something that if you want to try, definitely. Actually, for anyone who has a business idea, just filling out the YC application, I think is a very cathartic process, since it really tries to get you to like think really succinctly, like how short, how
critical thinking. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, that's something to be proud of as well, isn't it? I mean, getting into that type of cohort with that type of pass, that type of access point. So,
yep.
All power to you.
Yeah, totally. And then, like, the people say being a founder is lonely, and like having a cohort of a bunch of other people who are going through similar things, right? You definitely see the spectrum of who's people doing wildly successful to people who are like pivoting and like struggling, right? And so I think there's a lot of also, the founder network there is also great from a support.
Yeah, it's been like being on like a Navy SEAL training kind of thing with the boats.
Yep, totally.
So
not a bad analogy.
Don't burn the boats or don't drop the boats. So yeah, I mean, on the converse of that, I suppose what given the hugely, I suppose the tech industry is always evolving, always moving fast. It sounds like you've got on the back of some big growth, waves that are happening. With the adoption of data science, machine learning, LLMs, Python. What are you most excited about for the future?
Yeah, I mean, the large language model stuff I think is like more so than crypto. So I think crypto, I was I feel I was right to be a bit of a skeptic. But I mean, you
didn't buy all those Bored Ape Yacht Club NFTs. I mean, you didn't buy any of those.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think crypto was hyped, and there was some things that came out like blockchain. I think is pretty useful tech and pretty good applications in some places. I think within you kind of AI and the large language models, I think that there is a bit of hype there, but people are still figuring out how to do it. But like, I actually think it does potentially like change. Some particular tasks that people do internally can now help be done faster, or maybe even automated to a point where it's like you don't need much time to spend on it. And so kind of bullish for that. That changing companies. Like, I was actually kind of thinking, like, does that you used to have to like hire people, or you couldn't do something because it was you would need someone full time on it, and maybe you didn't have the funds or something. Now a smaller business maybe can potentially off the shelf, get something at a fraction of the cost. So this means that like companies are going to be staying smaller for longer. So the growth to enterprise and headcount is going to be a little different. Just because you can scale the existing people you have more. So does that mean the definition of a small or medium kind of business is going to extend or shrink, right, in terms of headcount, right? So it's kind of interesting, but otherwise,
I mean, you mean like with the use of AI to support the human work? Yeah.
So how did that change the dynamics of how people form companies? It's definitely learning myself. Like after a call, we need to transcribe something and send up a summary or email update. But now if someone can kind of do that, what might take me an hour or 2 hours is done in 15 minutes, right? And so you think of does that mean you can scale? I can scale myself more. So do I need to hire anyone else? Probably not quite so much, right? Or and so there's definitely, I think, efficiencies that I think part of the challenge is just figuring out like what are the right applications for where this really is actually good. And so this is where you see the Cambrian explosion of everyone trying it for various different things. We'll kind of see what sticks. I think the only issue to resolve is really cost. Is like, so how can you make it cost efficient and effective at scale that kind of works for different processes? So, that's an incentive for technology and things to improve. So definitely, I think but partly where are there going to be step function changes, or is it still going to, or is it going to slowly kind of plateau to some sort of, or asymptote to some sort of level? That's kind of the interesting stuff that I'm curious about. It's like, what does the steady state kind of look like? But otherwise,
it's never going to be. It's never going to be steady state, is it? It's
I mean, changing, but in terms of the velocity of, because right now I think the pace is just tremendous in terms of like advancements and things. But and so part of that is the little unknown is how far things are going to change, and how quickly. But with companies though, there's always usually the adoption curve. So this is where like traditionally enterprise has been pretty slow to adopt, and so I think what's interesting to me is this has galvanized people to, I think, to potentially change and adopt things faster or process.
Be a bit more agile about trying things out and experimenting.
So this is where I feel like I don't know how email changed things for people sending letters, right? Is there going to be a similar kind of change here that's going to kind of permeate and kind of go through? So I do think are we going to have personal assistants on our computers? That's because privacy is going to be a big thing, right? And so does that mean I can help automate some tasks that I have on my laptop, right, that I'm doing if I'm doing things, right? So in general, like that's what I'm bullish on in terms of changing. And then from a company perspective, there has to be some code written on the back end of that to make that all work. This is where I'm bullish on Python playing a big part in that. And then if Python's a big part of that, then what would something that can help people debug, diagnose, and kind of understand what's going on. Since there is a bit of, for me, it's a little ironic that people expect, humans make errors, but they're expecting these LLMs to be like human-like, but then they also humans error, so therefore they should error. So there's also the spectrum of like, how do you control, maintain, and make things?
Oh, wait, you mean where people are saying that the LLMs are not 100% accurate, and they're kind of complaining about that when humans make errors as well. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so then bridging the gap there, and so like what's the tooling that's required, so you can kind of diagnose and operate things, because it's kind of like because most of these models they're basically probabilistic machines, right? And so probability sometimes they might make something up or like do something else, so you're gonna have to
hallucinate.
Yeah, I guess the term. So I think there's definitely going to be work there to help like make things more deterministic, but then there's this tension between, I think, is it going to be large players like ChatGPT and OpenAI, or are there going to be lots of space for many small players and small models that are very specific just purely because they can make them more consistent or cheaper to run, So
well, I mean, I've noticed recently there's been kind of like a bit of I think there's something going on about a bit of a backlash with some of the model accuracy and stuff like that now, isn't there? So they were the darling, and now suddenly people are like digging into it and saying, oh, this is potentially a problem. This is potentially a problem. So I suppose it always goes through that kind of normal excitement, and then the penny drops about the reality of where they are with the capability. But
yeah, I mean,
it's definitely been interesting last 12 months anyway. So it's
totally. I mean, like there's new, Facebook is supposedly, releasing things, open sourcing things. There's, definitely, a lot of interest. And I think part of the interesting part for me is that it has potentially, things that it made regular software developers who didn't think they could do machine learning or AI type things feel like with these APIs and large language models, it's kind of made it more accessible to them to potentially feel like they can do something and build apps, right? And so I definitely think, I mean, is there going to be
there's like an opening out of the kind of that was that specialist skill before?
Opening out, or at least like they can build more themselves than they could previously, right? Because they didn't have the training or skill set, but now the LLM is just an API call, and they can do more. The other interesting trend to see is enterprise going to have to adopt things very differently than smaller companies, right? And so that's partly getting to your question on like the backlash on like I guess privacy, like what's going in with these data, who owns it. See now like companies
the copyright stuff as well.
So Reddit, for example, is a big treasure forum that a lot of things were trained on. But like Reddit's like, hey, you're now driving traffic away from us. We can't make ad revenues. So you can't get access to our data anymore. Right? And so there'd be kind of interesting to see how the open web reacts to that from that perspective, right? As well. So a lot of things are changing. Yeah, kind of interesting to kind of see. But otherwise, I do think it's more than there's definitely going to be things that it changes. But like to me, AGI is the ultimate goal. I think you're going to have it for specific tasks, but a general one, I think, is just like it might be too expensive to run. In which case, you're always going to just want like specialized. If you think about robots who do cleaning, you're just going to have special, AGIs that do specific things, right?
AGI? What do you define as AGI?
What's that? I want to make sure I get the A right. Artificial general intelligence, right?
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Okay.
Artificial general intelligence. So being someone, this is what they call like an agent or a bot, right? So that's kind of I see, I'm a little more skeptical there, but as to like the what's going to be built, but or at least in the near term, I think. But otherwise, I think part of it, part of the backlash is also, what jobs is it going to replace, right? And so, hard to say for me. It's going to replace too many jobs. If anything, it's going to extend people more efficient.
Okay. So I mean, in terms of, that's some really good insights. I mean, it's a very dynamic, tech's now centerpiece, and it's very dynamic. So people are going to start making some decisions rather than sitting on the fence. Yep. So I suppose that's the good thing about it. In terms of, I know that you shared some of these things through the episode already, but one of the things we do, we try and wrap up and ask each guest to give us some nuggets, some golden nuggets, some pearls of wisdom, some value bombs, from their journey so far. So I mean, if anybody who's listening to this episode, then what would be the ones you'd share from the desk of Stefan?
Yeah, you cheekily, like if you're doing anything in Python and doing data machine learning or LLM work, you should take a look at Hamilton. Help you structure your code in a way that helps your team move faster and maintain things over time. So there's this is a cheeky answer, but otherwise I think if I look back, it's
never miss an advert. Never miss opportunity to do an advert.
So one is I think you got to have the ambition if you want to do something, right? I think it takes you. Convincing yourself that you want to do something, and I think not being afraid to kind of do it. I think and so in that regard, like I think people like to help ambitious people, just because they maybe either see a reflection in themselves or they want to see them be successful, right? And so I think this is where not being afraid to ask for help or search out a contact or a mentor or someone, right? I think people generally want to be helpful. Obviously, some people can be oversubscribed, so not everyone can help. I think you definitely do get a lot of requests potentially in some places where you do that, but so like. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There's plenty of resources. There's definitely a lot of stuff out there. And then from the position of leading and other things, I think being a good listener, I think, is one of the things that I think I reflect on my time at watching great leaders at different tech companies and people who I admired or people who I admired working with. Right, they were great at. We're just being great listeners and being able to kind of make you feel heard and stuff. And so I think if you're going to build something and build rapport with people, I think being a great listener is goes with that. And then otherwise, I think rather than 3, I'll give a fourth one, which is obviously give back when you can. And so I am a bit of a karmic individual, so I think of all the help that I get when I see people reach out to me for help for like, hey, I want some feedback on my product. I'm like, I definitely know what you're trying to do because I'm trying to do the same thing. So I can let me cut to the chase, and you can see whether I'm helpful or not.
Yeah, what goes around comes around. Right. Yeah. No, that's some good ones. That's some really good ones. Thank you for sharing those. I mean, it's funny how because I was looking forward to this episode because I think you have got that. You've got that track you were going down, and obviously you're now doing having to deal with multiple different angles with your role. So, thank you for being so open in your perspectives and sharing your insights as well.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Yeah.
Which is part of it about being, what you said about your pearls of wisdom, about being open and everybody's like, everybody's learning, everybody's on their journey in some shape or form, aren't they? So, thank you for sharing yours today. So, yeah, that has been Stefan Krawczyk, who is the co-founder and CEO of DAGWorks, and already created some amazing, you could say, technology history by building Hamilton. Great little story around that, and a little segue to Lewis Hamilton. Bit of a shout out for Lewis Hamilton, that famous Formula One driver. Besides, obviously, Alexander Hamilton as well. That was Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. So thank you very much, Stefan, and have a great day.
Thanks, Andrew. Cheers.